Introduction. Step into a realm where fact and myth collide, where a single family name has rippled across centuries of wealth, power, and intrigue, the Rothschilds. Rising from Frankfurt's cramped Jewish quarter, Mayor Amschel Rothschild built a modest coin business into an international banking powerhouse spread across Europe's major capitals. His sons brokered government bonds, financed canals and railways, and even aided nations at war, all while cultivating an air of secrecy. The family's extravagant estates and legendary art collections made them cultural icons, yet their practice of marrying within the clan and maintaining absolute discretion spawned countless rumors and conspiracies. Though some claim the Rothschilds harbor hidden trillion-dollar fortunes or covertly steer world events, historians confirm a more nuanced truth. Uniting philanthropy, careful asset management, and business acumen, the Rothschilds transformed new money into a multi-generational legacy that has outlasted empires, revolutions, and shifting geopolitical frontiers, proving that behind each whispered tale lies a remarkable story of endurance, adaptation, and influence. How the Rothschilds went from new money to old money. The story begins with Mayor Amschel Rothschild, born in 1744 in Frankfurt's Judengasse, a cramped walled enclave where Jewish inhabitants confronted daily restrictions. City edicts curtailed the number of Jews who could marry and limited their freedom to exit the ghetto, which profoundly shaped Mayer's youth. Records at the Frankfurt Jewish Museum indicate that the Judengasse's narrow lanes enforced a collective closeness among Jewish families. In these confines, Mayer cultivated his early standing by trading in rare coins, antique metals, and precious metals, a specialized niche that demanded meticulous skill and a knack for subtlety. Though this field may sound modest by modern measures, in the 18th century it afforded a key path to high society, as rare coins served as a recognized form of value among Europe's aristocracy and introduced their purveyors to noble circles. Mayer's dealings soon caught the attention of Prince Wilhelm of Hesse, a notable leader within the Holy Roman Empire. According to diaries and letters preserved in the Rothschild Archive in London, Mayer's services swiftly went beyond coin transactions, evolving into a miniature form of financing for the private interests of nobles. This evolution laid the groundwork for a signature Rothschild practice. Make yourself indispensable to the powerful, yet remain subtle about your range of services. Many historians cite this as the start of the family's enduring inclination towards secrecy. In an age of precarious princely alliances, monarchic rule, and frequent military campaigns, the capacity to handle capital in a discreet manner was both rare and sought after. One of Mayer's most transformative moves involved converting his commercial successes into what amounted to a family bank network. By the close of the 1700s, he had 5 sons, Amschel, Salomon, Nathan, Kalman, Karl, and Jacob, James. As sources like Encyclopedia Britannica explain, Mayer took the somewhat radical approach of dispatching each son to a different European finance hub. While other merchant clans had offshoots, few developed the level of branding and unity that defined the Rothschild strategy. Rather than just establishing individual branches, each son established a banking enterprise and cultivated alliances with the regional power brokers, spanning Austria, France, Britain, and beyond. As Niall Ferguson chronicles in The House of Rothschild, this interlinked system was far more extensive than any standard multinational bank, more akin to a network of sibling firms united by familial bonds and shared ambition. Among Mayer's offspring, the most famous might be Nathan Mayer Rothschild, who set up operations in London. By 1809, he had acquired a formidable reputation there as a dealer. Publications like The Economist later emphasized Nathan's pivotal work in funding Britain's efforts during the Napoleonic Wars. Part of this success hinged on a communications network that outran official government messengers. Through Rothschild representatives and couriers, military updates and political insights reached Nathan faster than just about anyone else. This allowed him to forecast the government's borrowing needs or the market value of consols, British government bonds, ahead of London's financial sector. A famed example involves the aftermath of the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, though multiple legends abound, including some alleging that Nathan manipulated bond prices by pretending to hold inside knowledge of the outcome. More mainstream accounts, such as those featured in The Guardian, suggest the Rothschilds' edge lay in timely intelligence. Their messengers likely confirmed Napoleon's defeat sooner, enabling Nathan to secure a favorable position in the bond market. While some interpret it as a flamboyant tale of insider trading, historians like Ferguson and the aforementioned newspaper argue it was effectively rapid information, strategic trading, rather than an overtly unlawful maneuver, given the norms of that period. As the Napoleonic era wound down, the Rothschilds did not simply sit back on war spoils, but branched out financially in peacetime projects, funding infrastructure throughout the continent. One prominent case is their investment in Austrian railways. Salomon Rothschild, chiefly stationed in Vienna, proved vital in underwriting the Austrian emperor's grand railway expansions, thereby expediting Central Europe's industrial development. Meanwhile, James Jacob Rothschild in Paris played a major role in arranging French government loans and in fostering the birth of public institutions. By the mid-19th century, the family also contributed to financing the Suez Canal. Sources cited by the Suez Canal Authority highlight how Rothschild capital flowed at crucial junctures, preventing the project from collapsing amid French, British, and Egyptian political disputes. Their significant influence eventually led to recognition via noble ranks. As early as 1817, Emperor Francis I of Austria honored the Rothschilds with Austrian baronial titles. In Britain, by 1885, they had been granted seats in the peerage, firmly embedding them in Victorian aristocracy. These official distinctions, documented in various peerage registries, symbolized how they shifted from new money outsiders to old money insiders. Integrating real estate, cultural patronage, and established dynastic continuity, the Rothschilds became a prime model of how a nouveau riche family could, within a few generations, entrench itself among Europe's traditional noble houses. In tandem with banking enterprises, the Rothschilds adopted philanthropic roles usually linked to aristocrats of the time. They gave to museums, launched cultural endowments, and underwrote university expansions. At Waddesdon Manor, now managed by the National Trust, records illustrate how various family members methodically built art collections, sometimes gifting priceless works to public museums. These philanthropic moves were not random one-off gestures, but part of a carefully considered plan to cultivate public esteem and to integrate the name Rothschild into the cultural mainstream. In effect, they were emulating the time-honored custom of European princes who used patronage of the arts to strengthen their legitimacy. Thus, the Rothschild moniker, known first for cunning financial dealings, also became linked to philanthropic foundations and museum wings, echoing a long lineage of elite cultural guardianship. Family marriage strategies constituted another linchpin of their shift to old money status. Observers have frequently noted the Rothschild tradition of marrying cousins, a tactic that mixed familial loyalty with financial self-interest. The Jewish virtual library underscores that such intermarriage kept real estate, artistic holdings, and banking stocks firmly under Rothschild control, substantially reducing external meddling. While in 19th century Paris or Vienna these cousin marriages triggered rumors, comparing the Rothschilds to the Habsburgs or Bourbons, who also intermarried to preserve dynastic unity. The plan succeeded. By limiting heirs from beyond the lineage, the family minimized legal quarrels and prevented wealth from being scattered. This cohesion stood in contrast to rival commercial families that often fell victim to inheritance disputes. Furthermore, the Rothschilds diversified their assets beyond finance. By the late 1800s, distinct branches of the family acquired lavish estates, set up vineyards, most famously Chateau Mouton Rothschild in the Bordeaux region, and curated major art collections. Articles in the Financial Times describe how these estates, built with a French chateau aesthetic, hosted visiting royals, politicians, and literary icons. Such gatherings were more than social events. They served as high-level networking occasions where state treaties or alliances were sometimes shaped. The architectural majesty of these properties, filled with carefully chosen antiques, classic paintings, and ornamental gardens, reinforced the notion that the Rothschilds weren't just bankers, but custodians of heritage and culture. A bedrock of this prestigious image remained the family's cloak of secrecy. From the early Judengasse days, Rothschild ventures were famously confidential. Research at the University of Cambridge suggests that their private partnerships rarely published financial statements, never shared profits publicly, and operated with quasi-feudal discretion. Account books stayed under tight lock and key. Rival bankers, more accustomed to partially public ownership, struggled to gauge the exact depth of Rothschild coffers. The advantage of quick capital relocation from Paris to Naples or from Vienna to London stemmed partly from not having to answer to any external shareholders. This hush-hush environment benefited their political dealings as well. Governments knew they could arrange war loans or major infrastructure financing behind sealed doors, providing yet another lure for potentates seeking confidentiality in risky deals. As their expansion continued, each branch, Amschel in Frankfurt, Salomon in Vienna, Nathan in London, Carl in Naples, and James in Paris, operated with local customs, but retained the overarching Rothschild ethos. Visitors to different family establishments could note varying architectural styles or cultural approaches, yet a shared emphasis on exclusivity and internal solidarity remained evident. Bloomberg has pointed out that, even to this day, the Rothschild brand exemplifies disciplined public relations and strong family coherence. Although the 19th century saw major upheavals like the revolutions of 1848 or the Franco-Prussian War, the network framework let them shuffle resources when regional unrest occurred. Where some financiers became overstretched during political chaos, the Rothschild cross-continental approach offered a steadier, more flexible foundation. By the late 19th century, commentators began to compare the Rothschilds with rising American dynasties such as the Rockefellers and Carnegies. Newspaper articles regularly covered the scale of Rothschild charity projects, and observers noted their capacity to sway entire sectors, from railroads to commodities trading. Unlike some American families prone to factional infighting, the Rothschilds generally presented a united front. This unity was fostered through distributing critical management roles among male scions, guaranteeing that each segment of the family had direct stakes in overall outcomes. While inheritance taxes and shifting global markets affected them, as they did other financiers, official family papers and assorted archives confirm a habit of reinventing themselves, moving from wartime finance into post-war development, and from there into fresh fields like utilities, mines, or new stock exchanges. A fitting illustration is found in various late 19th century social columns in the Times of London. They mention Rothschilds at Covent Garden opera nights or lavish gatherings at Buckingham Palace. Even though these might appear purely ceremonial, insiders recognize that major government financings or cross-border commercial pacts often carried a Rothschild signature. Royals, diplomats, and major industry moguls courted the Rothschild ear, hoping for a favorable lending agreement or a coveted introduction. The resourcefulness of the new money origins in Frankfurt's Jewish ghetto had evolved into a patrician aura, effectively placing the Rothschilds alongside Europe's established aristocracies. Yet behind the pomp of gracious estates and philanthropic banquets ran a calculated interplay of finance and social savvy. Their charitable activities, endowing museums, founding hospitals, funding Jewish communal initiatives, were partly altruistic but also a strategic ploy to consolidate social acceptance and smoother political relations. In Britain, for example, the Rothschilds supported free medical clinics in London's poorer neighborhoods during a time when public welfare was minimal. Contemporary press outlets like the Illustrated London News praised these efforts, observing that it quelled suspicion of foreign financiers within an often insular culture. Several Rothschild branches also pursued philanthropy in the Middle East, which over time blossomed into funding for cultural and educational causes in that region. The creation of initiatives like Yad Hanadiv in Israel, bankrolled by Rothschild heirs, illustrated how the family continued its philanthropic traditions beyond Europe. Although much of this occurred in the 20th century, it was rooted in the earlier 19th century custom of building schools, backing libraries, and financing hospitals across Europe. By the closing decades of the 1800s, the Rothschild image shone so brightly that visitors to their residences, such as Château de Ferrières near Paris or Waddesdon Manor in England, would compare them to the palatial homes of bygone royal dynasties. Exhaustive inventories now housed in places like Waddesdon list acquisitions of old master artworks, French Rococo furniture, and extensive porcelain sets rivaling those of any royal lineage. Princes, prime ministers, and statesmen attended weekend house parties, forging alliances that in earlier centuries were the sole preserve of hereditary nobility. Though anti-Semitic sentiments persisted in certain aristocratic enclaves, the Rothschild brand faced less hostility thanks to their wealth, philanthropic track record, and influential ties. Maintaining secrecy remained paramount. While some public mention of their donations and philanthropic gifts was inevitable, the exact workings of Rothschild finances stayed hidden. Research from the University of Cambridge indicates that the family's partnership agreements were typically renewed privately every few years, ensuring that only direct relations had true visibility into the balance sheets. Other banks, whether on Lombard Street in London or in Paris's business quarters, found it nearly impossible to predict the Rothschilds' next move. In times of turmoil, European governments also struggled to gauge how much capital the family could inject into a state treasury. This opacity gave the Rothschilds a powerful bargaining chip for negotiating interest rates and overall conditions whenever a government urgently required funds. Progressing into the 20th century, the Rothschild presence stayed strong. Although each branch ventured into different new industries, some delved into energy or mining, others retained focus on government bonds. The group as a whole adhered to its fundamental principles, controlling information flows, building personal liaisons with influential political figures, and avoiding reliance on any single market. The Wall Street Journal has documented how Rothschild involvement in ventures, ranging from late 19th century Russian bonds to early 20th century African mining, retained the same watchful approach. Swiftly reallocate capital if one region became destabilized. Over time, this method became almost a prototype for international finance. As the 19th century ended and the 20th began, many in Europe and beyond viewed the Rothschilds as a continental counterpart to America's expanding magnates, typified by their philanthropic gestures and ability to shape entire economic landscapes. Consistent governance, reliant on keeping the entire clan invested in the broader enterprise, minimized internal disputes. In short, the Rothschilds exhibited a brand of adaptability that let them pivot from war loans to infrastructure and ultimately to fresh frontiers like industrial energy or advanced financial markets. Thus, a telling image emerges from the Times of London Society columns in the late 1800s. Rothschilds rubbing shoulders at opulent venues, forging deals with aristocrats and statesmen, and continuing to funnel funds into massive cross-border projects. Their metamorphosis from the narrow confines of the Frankfurt Judengasse to the upper tiers of European nobility exemplified what can occur when business acumen, familial unity, and discreet financing converge. While they never entirely shed the stereotypes of being cunning financiers, the Rothschilds intertwined financial might with philanthropic engagement and an aristocratic lifestyle, effectively becoming part of Europe's cultural aristocracy. Yet behind each philanthropic gala, behind every donated art piece, there was a carefully orchestrated synergy of finance and social diplomacy. It's that synergy that transformed the Rothschilds from new money tradesmen into an old money dynasty at the heart of Europe's elite. Inside the Rothschild old money mansions. Throughout their long history, the Rothschild family's estates have served as more than just homes. They have functioned as symbols of power, diplomatic tools, and tangible representations of their colossal wealth. Unlike many aristocratic dwellings that simply housed artwork and antiques, Rothschild mansions embodied a carefully orchestrated style known as Le Goût Rothschild, merging French architectural influences, classical European interiors, and an unspoken mission to host social, political, and philanthropic gatherings at the highest level. Far from being ornamental, these properties played a central role in solidifying the family's influence across Europe and beyond. Waddesdon Manor in Buckinghamshire, England, serves as perhaps the most recognizable showcase of the Rothschild family's penchant for blending architectural splendor with a strategic approach to cultural diplomacy. Commissioned in the late 19th century by Baron Ferdinand de Rothschild, a member of the British branch of the family, Waddesdon's design drew upon the stately charm of the Loire Valley Chateau. Its steeply pitched roofs, elaborate turrets, and limestone facades were inspired by 16th century French Renaissance architecture, notably found in historical landmarks like the Château de Chambord and Château de Chenonceau. According to detailed records held by the National Trust, Baron Ferdinand spared no expense in bringing this vision to life. He enlisted the services of distinguished architects and sourced construction materials of the highest caliber, ensuring that the estate would stand as a triumph of craftsmanship and aesthetic harmony. Stepping inside, visitors are immersed in an interior landscape defined by painstakingly gilded moldings, carved wood paneling, and plush grand salons furnished with authentic Louis XVI chairs, upholstered in rich silk or velvet. The walls are adorned with portraits by renowned British painters such as Thomas Gainsborough and Sir Joshua Reynolds, while rare Sèvres porcelain pieces, some of which once graced the tables of French royalty, occupy display cabinets throughout the principal rooms. In one celebrated drawing room, an 18th century tapestry series, possibly originating from the famed Gobelins manufactory in Paris, provides a dramatic focal point that underscores Baron Ferdinand's drive to assemble a museum-worthy collection under one roof. Beyond these aesthetic marvels, the manor's function went well beyond the mere display of wealth. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Waddesdon regularly hosted what local newspapers called weekend house parties of spectacular brilliance. Nobility from continental Europe, influential British diplomats, and powerful industrialists were frequently in attendance. Contemporary accounts in periodicals such as the Illustrated London News describe how Baron Ferdinand's guests would arrive by train at a private railway station built expressly to serve the estate, before being escorted through immaculately groomed gardens to dine in salons flooded by the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. Menus often boasted fine French cuisine, paired with the Rothschilds' prized wines, especially those from the family's vineyards at Chateau Lafite Rothschild or Chateau Mouton Rothschild. According to correspondence housed at the Waddesdon Manor archive, these gatherings were not solely about culinary indulgence or leisurely conversation. Beneath the lavish veneer, Baron Ferdinand deftly orchestrated opportunities for business introductions, philanthropic pitches, and even tentative diplomatic overtures. It was not unusual for guests to engage in discreet negotiations involving government loans, railway concessions, or urban development projects. Such interactions contributed to what the Times, in an 1897 feature on Rothschild influence, termed the invisible framework of modern finance, a web of personal connections that could advance the family's banking interests while also championing charitable endeavors. Politically, Waddesdon's role as a site of dialogue became increasingly prominent around the turn of the century. Some historians suggest that quiet talks concerning Britain's foreign policy in the lead-up to World War I took place within these very rooms, while the manor's salons also served as informal forums for discussing legislative reforms related to public health or education. Moreover, the estate functioned as a showcase for Baron Ferdinand's philanthropic inclinations. Certain weekend gatherings spotlighted emerging charitable causes of the day, such as hospital expansions or scholarships for underprivileged youth, and on several occasions culminated in significant donations or pledges. Witness accounts from visitors such as the American socialite Consuelo Vanderbilt mention the tangible sense of purpose that accompanied dinner discussions, highlighting how high society at Waddesdon, for all its glamour, often addressed substantive public matters. From an artistic viewpoint, Waddesdon also contributed to broader cultural scholarship. Over time, Baron Ferdinand and his heirs cataloged their acquisitions and opened select collections to researchers. Early 20th century art historians, including those affiliated with the Victoria and Albert Museum, were occasionally granted permission to study Renaissance tapestries of Louis XV furnishings on site. By cooperating with these experts, the Rothschild family cemented Waddesdon's standing as an institution of cultural heritage rather than a closed private realm. This openness, rare among major collectors of the day, helped elevate the Rothschild name beyond the sphere of finance, aligning it with the intellectual and academic communities devoted to art conservation. In Buckinghamshire, only a short distance from Waddesdon Manor's stately gardens, both Mentmore Towers and Halton House further illustrate how the Rothschilds harnessed architecture and interior design as instruments of influence and financial strategy. Mentmore Towers, commissioned by Baron Mayor Amschel de Rothschild in the mid-19th century, stands out for its bold Victorian grandeur. Designed by Sir Joseph Paxton, celebrated for his work on the Crystal Palace, the mansion incorporated sweeping staircases, high ceilings, and extensive use of oak paneling, which gave every corridor and salon an aristocratic ambience. According to archives cited by the Victoria and Albert Museum, Mentmore's drawing rooms were filled with gilded furniture and old master paintings from schools across Italy, France, and the Low Countries, contributing to a setting so lavish that some contemporaries likened it to a royal palace. Beyond providing an impressive venue for weekend entertainments, Mentmore became a backdrop for more subtle forms of diplomacy. When high-ranking politicians or notable industrialists were invited to the estate, they would find themselves immersed in an environment that seamlessly intertwined the Rothschilds' commercial power and their cultural sophistication. Private letters from that era, documented in local historical society records, mention late-night discussions around oak tables, where large-scale loans or infrastructure deals might be tentatively shaped long after dinner concluded. Equally emblematic of this vision is Halton House, constructed for Alfred de Rothschild near the close of the 19th century. While Waddesdon Manor borrowed heavily from the Loire Valley Renaissance chateau, Halton House nodded to the French Second Empire style, complete with steep mansard roofs, ornamental dormer windows, and a facade that balanced classical proportions with Baroque exuberance. Early photographs published in the Illustrated London News reveal that guests entering the front hall were met with intricately carved stone columns, marble fireplaces, and gold-accented walls, all of which emphasize the house's aspiration to rival the splendor of continental courts. Lavish receptions often took place in a grand dining hall, where sculpted wall paneling and large mirrors amplified the sense of opulence. During these gatherings, members of the British and European aristocracy mingled with bankers, military officers, and representatives of various governments. In many ways, Halton House served as a microcosm of how the Rothschilds seamlessly blended social pageantry with economic opportunity, using dinners and dances to broaden the network of relationships that underpin their far-reaching business interests. It was, as one contemporary writer for the Times phrased it, a place where one might eat and drink with half of Europe's decision-makers. What sets Halton House apart from many other Rothschild estates is the fact that it was later acquired by the Royal Air Force at the turn of the 20th century, marking a practical shift in the property's utility. Rather than clinging to every mansion as a private domain, the Rothschild heirs recognized that selective divestiture could be just as beneficial as strategic acquisition. The sale allowed them to reallocate capital into emerging opportunities in the banking or industrial sectors, a choice reflecting the family's determination to sustain and adapt their wealth, rather than simply hoard historical residences. Today, Halton House functions partly as a ceremonial venue for RAF events, with certain halls still exuding a faint echo of the glittering parties Alfred once hosted. A detailed entry on the official RAF website notes that the main reception rooms, though updated for military use, retain many original architectural details, including marble floors, French-inspired archways, and high-relief panels, reminding visitors that the estate was once a stage for Rothschild sophistication. When considered alongside Waddesdon Manor, these two properties attest to a broader Rothschild philosophy. On one hand, Mentmore Towers underscored the family's passion for art collecting and top-tier craftsmanship. Its oak-paneled halls and masterpieces from Titian, Veronese, and Reynolds formed a setting that not only satisfied personal taste, but also attracted statesmen and business magnates. On the other, Halton House revealed how flexible the Rothschilds could be in managing their sprawling real estate portfolio. If a property's political or diplomatic significance waned, selling it to a government agency or private buyer could convert opulent bricks and mortar into capital for newer ventures. Both mansions, like Wadesden, facilitated encounters between policy influencers, leading industrialists and philanthropic advocates, thus weaving socializing into the warp and weft of finance and governance. Across the English Channel, French estates such as the Château de Ferrières reaffirmed this reputation for architectural splendor and cultural gravitas. Built in the 1850s for Baron James de Rothschild, Ferrières evoked a neo-Renaissance grandeur and contained a trove of paintings, tapestries, and rare objects that rivaled many public museums. During the Second Empire, the chateau welcomed figures like Napoleon III and numerous foreign dignitaries, further boosting the family's standing in political spheres. War and turmoil tested its resilience. The Nazi occupation led to the loss of significant artworks and furnishings. Yet the Rothschild commitment to reclamation and restitution in the post-war years reflects their determination to preserve the historic and financial worth tied up in these remarkable places. Over time, partial donations and sales allowed Ferrières to become, at various moments, a setting for cultural events and academic institutions, blending aristocratic heritage with more contemporary public functions. Unlike these sprawling manors, Château Mouton Rothschild in Pauillac, France, is primarily associated with world-class wine production. However, the chateau's tasteful yet understated exteriors also bear the Rothschild stamp of authenticity and refinement. Inside, its gathering spaces showcase an evolving art collection featuring original works created for Mouton Rothschild's iconic wine labels. Here, creativity merges with commerce. Each year, a different artist, from Picasso to Prince Charles, contributes a label design illustrating how the family leveraged artistic endeavors to enhance the global appeal of their vineyard. This marriage of art and enology did more than elevate Mouton Rothschild's brand. It reaffirmed the Rothschild inclination to transcend pure banking and weave cultural experiences into their economic portfolio. In that sense, the chateau exemplifies how wine production, fine art, and hospitality can fuse into a profitable tradition, burnishing the family's image as patrons of both the arts and modern enterprise. When viewed collectively, these Rothschild residences underscore how architecture, interiors, and careful stewardship serve the broader objective of maintaining dynastic wealth. Their sumptuous rooms, furnished with antique tapestries, commissioned portraits, and gilded furniture, were not passive showcases of prosperity. They were active instruments of diplomacy where an invitation to a grand ball or a weekend retreat might yield discreet negotiations on bonds, coal mines, or railway concessions. The immaculate gardens, designed to impress both royals and statesmen, often doubled as serene backdrops for political dialogues or philanthropic fundraising. In hosting aristocratic circles and luminaries of the time, the Rothschilds systematically cemented alliances that expanded their global reach in finance, railroads, and other ventures. Perhaps most significantly, these estates operated as tangible assets within the family's investment philosophy. Real estate in prime locations could be sold or donated if financial or political needs dictated, a flexible approach that safeguarded the Rothschild fortune against the volatility of wars and economic crises. Whether entrusting Wadesden Manor to the National Trust or permitting military use of Halton House, the family demonstrated a willingness to pivot as circumstances evolved. Moreover, the vast collections of old masters and decorative objects stored within these residences functioned as both cultural capital and a form of liquidity, capable of being transferred, loaned, or auctioned in times of crisis. Far from limiting their business outlook, such pride in the arts drew valuable attention and respect from public institutions and governments, thus strengthening the Rothschilds' standing as philanthropic visionaries. Ultimately, the Rothschild mansions are more than feats of architecture. They represent a deliberate melding of style, strategy, and social engagement that spans generations. Every embroidered chair in a drawing room, every gilded mirror in a corridor, and every Renaissance tapestry in a salon bears witness to a philosophy that saw domestic space as a crucible for forging relationships, inspiring creative expression, and elevating the family's global power. Today, as many of these houses are open to the public or used for academic and charitable purposes, the legacy of these architectural gems continues to echo, reminding visitors that wealth can manifest not only as financial influence but also as a deep cultural and artistic heritage. Through these estates, the Rothschilds built a lasting bridge between beauty and power, demonstrating that carefully curated interiors, high-profile gatherings, and strategic ownership of prime properties can amplify both financial might and social prestige over the course of centuries. The secret life of the Rothschild family heirs. If we look back to historical records preserved by the Rothschild Archive in London or references in the Jewish Virtual Library, the family's penchant for privacy is hardly new. Mayor Amschel Rothschild, often cited as the dynasty's founder, established a business model in late 18th century Frankfurt that thrived on forging alliances with royal courts and discreetly managing finances on an international scale. Over the centuries, the family's approach to secrecy evolved from a need to protect themselves from political upheaval, especially during eras like the Napoleonic Wars, into a well-honed practice of sustaining unity and safeguarding personal privacy in a world obsessed with celebrity. In our era, when even trivial details about billionaire lifestyles can rocket around social media, that sense of strategic invisibility serves them well. Yet while the earliest Rothschilds might have used confidentiality to steer clear of monarchs or revolutions, modern heirs find that their greatest threat often comes from paparazzi, tabloids, or social media commentators looking to sensationalize their wealth. Still, glimpses of these heirs do emerge, particularly through more visible family members. One standout example is Nathaniel Nat Rothschild, frequently referred to in the business press, though informally and with variations on aristocratic titles, as the fifth Baron Rothschild. Mainstream financial publications like the Financial Times, Bloomberg, and Forbes have kept close tabs on his activities, especially in hedge funds and mining. Around 2011 to 2012, he made an especially loud splash with a high-stakes plan to consolidate Indonesian coal assets, joining forces with local magnates. This venture got complicated fast. It involved intense boardroom battles, shifting alliances, and lawsuits that made headlines far beyond financial newspapers. Bloomberg chronicled the affair in extensive detail, pointing out that while the Rothschild name might open doors, it doesn't always guarantee a smooth journey, especially in global markets prone to volatility and local political entanglements. In 2012, Forbes put Nat's net worth at around $1 billion, although subsequent legal tussles and market fluctuations likely changed that figure. What's striking is how his willingness to chase resource opportunities in emerging markets echoes the family's historic tradition of venturing into uncharted territory. Whereas earlier Rothschild generations did it quietly and mostly behind closed doors, Nat's undertakings took place on a more public stage, reflecting the heightened media attention and transparency demands of our time. In fact, the Financial Times underscored this parallel by drawing connections between Nat's approach and the Rothschild habit of courting high-risk frontiers. Historically, the family financed European monarchies, bankrolled infrastructure projects, and negotiated major government loans that shaped the fate of empires. Documents from the Rothschild archive reveal how they diversified early on, from government bonds to railways, and then later to industries like mining, metallurgy, and wine. Yes, the legendary Chateau Mouton Rothschild wines are part of this extensive family empire, with vintages celebrated in publications like Wine Spectator. So Nat's dabbling in Indonesian coal or Latin American resource plays is a modern extension of a centuries-old formula. Take big risks, anticipate big rewards, and navigate the complexities of local politics. Just don't expect him to bare his soul on social media. He, like other Rothschilds, typically offers only sparse public statements, letting official filings or carefully worded press releases do most of the talking. Another Rothschild who occasionally steps into the spotlight is James Rothschild, perhaps most recognizable in mainstream celebrity news for his marriage to Nikki Hilton in 2015. According to outlets like People and the New York Times, the wedding was quite the extravagant event. Described as a society wedding uniting two powerhouse families, the Rothschilds and the Hiltons. The coverage touched on all the expected elements: luxury gowns, a glittering guest list, plenty of speculation about inherited wealth and dynastic alliances. Yet if you dig deeper, you'll see that James himself stays out of gossip columns as much as possible. He co-founded True Arrow Partners, an investment firm specializing in tech startups and growth stage ventures. Then there's his philanthropic side. He devotes time to Yad Hanadiv, the Rothschild Philanthropic Foundation in Israel. Multiple articles in the Jewish Virtual Library and direct statements from Yad Hanadiv highlight just how long-standing the family's legacy in Israeli philanthropy is, from educational grants to cultural initiatives that stretch back to the earliest days of the modern state. This continuity, pairing 21st century venture capital with philanthropic traditions that go back more than 100 years, really captures how today's Rothschild heirs blend innovation with their storied roots, and they don't just focus on finance or Israel-related causes. Hannah Rothschild, for example, leans toward the cultural and artistic sphere. She's an accomplished writer and filmmaker who served as chair of London's National Gallery from 2015 to 2019. Her appointment made waves in British media, with sources like the BBC and The Telegraph noting she was the first woman ever to hold that post, a milestone in the gallery's nearly two-century history. Her novel, The Improbability of Love, delivers a satirical view of the art market, showing that her sense of humor about money and power is as refined as her artistic taste. While she doesn't beat readers over the head with her Rothschild heritage, her interviews often reveal that being part of such a famous banking family offers a unique vantage point on privilege and influence. British cultural commentators have observed that her role at the National Gallery dovetails neatly with the Rothschild tradition of collecting and championing art. The family's connection to major museums isn't new. They've been involved in everything from donating artworks to supporting behind-the-scenes funding. In fact, there are even references in The Telegraph to older Rothschild family members who curated large private art collections that became the backbone of European cultural institutions. During her tenure, Hannah openly addressed issues like funding gaps and the question of how to keep museums accessible to everyone, a challenge that resonates with large cultural institutions worldwide. Of course, for every Rothschild whose name pops up in a high-profile scenario, like an art world leadership role or a celebrity wedding, there are countless relatives who consciously steer clear of public life. The Rothschild Archive in London documents numerous family branches that span Europe, North America, and the Middle East, some of which rarely speak to the media, if at all. Yet they remain active in philanthropy. Organizations like the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum have reported periodic anonymous donations that insiders attribute to Rothschild-linked trusts. Environmental groups such as the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, also note large gifts that never quite pin down their source in public statements. This level of anonymity reflects a guiding family principle that genuine charity shouldn't become a platform for personal glory, an idea traced all the way back to Mayor Amschel Rothschild and quoted in several historical overviews, including the Jewish Virtual Library. Discretion, once crucial to shielding the family from unstable political regimes, now helps them maintain distance from the frenzy that swirls around modern billionaires in the era of 24-hour news cycles. A big part of how they manage this discretion is by leveraging a labyrinth of trusts and private companies. Over the last decade, Bloomberg journalists have attempted to map the Rothschild financial world, only to find themselves entangled in a maze of holding companies, shell corporations, and partial stakes. To illustrate, a single branch might own shares in Rothschild and Company, keep an interest in vineyards like Chateau Mouton Rothschild, and maintain property in financial hubs like London and New York. But the paper trail is guarded by overlapping boards and trusts. From a legal perspective, this serves as a handy way to minimize inheritance disputes and taxes. From a public relations standpoint, it effectively puts a barrier between the heirs and a media environment ready to pounce on any sign of extravagance. As some analysts note, the modern rationale for this secrecy mirrors the older Rothschild strategy of dodging the limelight. Except now, the threats come from gossip sites and viral social media posts rather than the wrath of 19th century monarchs. For those Rothschilds who do step onto the public stage, they typically focus on a mission rather than personal fame. David Mayer de Rothschild is a clear example. He made waves with the Plastiki expedition, sailing across the Pacific in a vessel built from recycled plastic bottles to spotlight environmental issues. Outlets like CNN and National Geographic gave him prime coverage, painting him as an eco-adventurer on a mission to raise awareness of ocean pollution. His background was never a secret. His last name comes with significant baggage after all. But he deliberately framed his narrative around ocean health, climate change, and our collective responsibility for the planet. The Guardian and other media sources did point out the irony in a scion of a storied banking family criticizing consumer culture. But David stayed consistent, focusing on practical ways to curb plastic waste and champion sustainability, in keeping with the family's broader strategy of controlling the narrative and making sure their name stays tied to constructive goals rather than tabloid gossip. Collectively, the Rothschilds of today are a varied lot. Sure, some remain in the fold of Rothschild and Company or other financial arms, preserving their roots in international banking and wealth management. Others look outward to mining ventures, philanthropic tech funds, or environmental activism. Recent genealogical data from the Rothschild Archive pinpoints 5 principal family branches, each adopting its own internal governance. They do come together for philanthropic causes, often rallying around projects that support Jewish communities, uphold historical legacies, or tackle urgent environmental challenges. On the day-to-day level, though, each subgroup forges its own path, sometimes leading to conflicts. Take Nat Rothschild's Indonesian coal project, for example. Media coverage indicated that some family members were wary of the reputational risks associated with frontier markets. Still, the overarching ethos emphasizes unity in the face of major opportunities, tempered by an ingrained respect for privacy. If we stitch all this together, we get a modern take on the so-called secret life of Rothschild heirs, one that's less about clandestine conspiracies or hidden fortresses, and more about individuals juggling the demands of personal ambition under a heavy legacy. Multiple interviews in The Guardian suggest that part of the reason they manage this balancing act so effectively is that the Rothschild clan never positioned itself as a modern celebrity family. They don't do reality TV or splashy interviews dishing on their daily spending. By maintaining a more dispersed structure with separate branches, focusing on everything from finance and arts to sustainability, they avoid the intense spotlight that falls on single centralized dynasties. Of course, that means you'll get the occasional big event, like James Rothschild's headline-grabbing wedding, but even then, the narrative is skillfully steered toward charitable or cultural themes. That isn't to say all traces of old-world grandeur have vanished. Some heirs still inhabit centuries-old estates in England or France, occasionally hosting lavish fundraising galas or private investor gatherings. Society pages in Europe do reference these soirees every now and then, hinting at a refined opulence that harks back to the family's 18th and 19th century heyday. In countries like France, properties such as Chateau Lafite Rothschild regularly feature in upscale publications like Decanter, with critics raving about the wine's complexities and global reputation. In London, older Rothschild estates still pop up in architectural guides and historical tours, reinforcing the sense that this family's imprint is woven into Europe's cultural fabric. Nonetheless, over-the-top displays of wealth are rare. If one branch splashes out on a major event, you can bet they'll tie it to a cause, like fundraising for Holocaust education or the arts, downplaying the glitz in favor of a philanthropic angle. James Rothschild's nuptials with Nikki Hilton might have been a momentary exception, but even that was framed in the press mostly as a merging of two famed family names rather than a Kardashian-style extravaganza. Meanwhile, the philanthropic dimension runs deep. Certain Rothschild-affiliated trusts fund Jewish community centers across Europe, sponsor educational grants for underprivileged youth, and help preserve historical archives. Yad Hanadiv in Israel is one major beneficiary of this tradition, supporting everything from environmental programs to the iconic Knesset building. Archives at the University of Southampton referencing philanthropic records also highlight the Rothschilds' role in funding scientific research during the Victorian era, a pattern that continues in modern times with grants for cutting-edge tech and medical studies. Analysts from philanthropic watchdog groups say that, although not all donations are made under the Rothschild banner, there's a common thread. The family seems less interested in brandishing their name and more in ensuring that targeted causes receive sustained and meaningful support. Adding to the complexity is the family's role in global finance, which persists in a shifting economic landscape. Rothschild & Company, a major player in mergers and acquisitions advisory, consistently ranks among the top global investment banks, according to data from Bloomberg. At times, they've been involved in guiding multinational corporations through big restructurings or cross-border mergers, building on centuries of expertise in brokering major deals. Yet that success also breeds rumors and conspiracy theories. There's a persistent myth that the Rothschilds somehow control the world's money supply. Investigative pieces by publications like The Economist have debunked these fantasies time and again, explaining that while the Rothschild and Kerns brand is influential, The family's wealth today is neither as centralized nor as unfathomably large as conspiracy theorists claim. Instead, it's more accurate to see them as a web of distinct branches, each with its own portfolio, philanthropic leanings, and day-to-day priorities. This mosaic of modern Rothschilds reveals a curious contradiction. On one hand, they're deeply linked to a legendary name that still symbolizes power and opulence. On the other, they work hard, often behind the scenes, to keep a relatively low profile, even when engaged in public-facing ventures. They might co-host a gala or spearhead an initiative like the Plastiki expedition, but the spotlight is pointed toward the project's mission, rather than the Rothschild identity. This approach is reminiscent of the family's historical knack for reading the social and political landscape and adjusting their strategy accordingly. Back in the days when they financed warring states, they had to master the art of balance and diplomacy. In today's media-saturated environment, they rely on trusts, philanthropic anonymity, and selective public appearances to steer clear of sensationalism. When The Guardian or Bloomberg do manage to gather more in-depth perspectives, they reveal a family that is surprisingly decentralized. Each branch has its own leadership style, shaped by factors ranging from local regulations to personal passions. One branch might be championing green ventures, another might be delving into high-tech, while a third remains committed to more traditional banking pursuits. When they do unite, say, to support Jewish education or restore historical monuments, the synergy can be impressive. After all, with centuries of experience and accumulated capital at their disposal, few families can mobilize philanthropic or investment initiatives quite like the Rothschilds can. Yet for all the speculation about secret meetings or controlling interests, what emerges is a group of individuals who have inherited both an illustrious name and a carefully cultivated set of principles. First and foremost among these principles is privacy. Where many of today's wealthy might chase headlines or curate lifestyles for public consumption on social media, modern Rothschild heirs generally prefer to manage their affairs quietly, whether that's funding museums, venturing into emerging markets, or supporting environmental causes. And given how quickly the rumor mill churns out stories about the super rich, it's a strategy that seems poised to continue. Discretion, after all, has served this family well for well over 2 centuries. In the end, the Rothschild heirs aren't so much cloistered away in hidden castles as they are distributed across various spheres: finance, philanthropy, art, technology, each carving out a niche that resonates with personal interests and family tradition. Publications ranging from the New York Times to BBC News occasionally shed light on these activities, but they rarely capture the full scope. And that's how the Rothschilds like it, staying relevant in core sectors of global finance and philanthropy, all while retaining a cloak of subtlety in an age otherwise fixated on exposure. Their background might be legendary, their holdings global, and their philanthropic footprints massive, but they continuously adapt to the times, preserving the quiet unity that has always defined them. How the Rothschild family manages its wealth. The continued ability of the Rothschild family to remain both influential and elusive over centuries of upheaval can be traced to a distinct combination of strategic foresight, measured risk-taking, and a commitment to cohesiveness that has endured since the days of Mayor Amschel Rothschild in late 18th century Frankfurt. From his original principle of measured risk and unified front, the family has never entirely turned away from bold ventures, yet they have done so with caution, carefully distributing resources across geographical regions and economic sectors. At the same time, They have cultivated an extraordinary capacity for secrecy through a network of trusts and private holdings, insulating themselves from the glare of public scrutiny and the ever-present risk of political or market volatility. Rothschild and Company in London and the Edmond de Rothschild Group in Geneva exemplify this tradition of dual focus on prudence and opportunity. Rothschild and Company emerged in 2003 from the merger of British and French banking ventures that each carried its own legacy, stretching back to the early 19th century. Over the centuries, this institution has transitioned from underwriting loans for European monarchs and funding railroads to becoming a key player in large-scale corporate restructurings, high-profile mergers and acquisitions, and initial public offerings for everything from tech startups to energy firms. The ability of Rothschild and Company to remain near the top of global league tables for M&A reflects a modern twist on the family's historical role. Rather than broker deals for royal courts, they now shape the trajectories of multinational corporations and advise major governments on sovereign debt management. While their business is public-facing, reports from outlets such as Bloomberg and The Economist emphasize how rarely insiders discuss the finer details of the firm's decision-making processes, highlighting a deep-rooted commitment to secrecy. The Edmond de Rothschild Group, founded in 1953 by Baron Edmund Adolf de Rothschild, shows a parallel philosophy that prioritizes long-term stability over short-term windfalls. This outlook served the institution well during turbulent periods like the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, which devastated many financial institutions that over-leveraged themselves. Baron Benjamin de Rothschild, who led the group until his passing in 2021, frequently underscored the importance of avoiding excessive risk and focusing on steady growth. In interviews and profiles, he acknowledged that this cautious stance echoes the original Mayor Amschel mindset, a family ethos that has provided steady guidance regardless of whether the world was preoccupied with Napoleonic conflicts, 20th century world wars, or the digital disruption of the new millennium. Though banking remains central, the Rothschilds have never confined themselves to finance alone. Their wide-ranging ventures have historically included canal projects and railroads in the 19th century, and in more recent times they have taken significant stakes in energy and mining. Reports by Reuters and the Financial Times indicate that, at various points, the family has invested heavily in companies such as Glencore, reflecting a belief in frontier opportunities that traces back to the railroad building era. Recent years have even seen branches of the family explore renewables, forming partnerships with solar and wind companies that promise to align profitability with a more ecologically conscious approach. This demonstrates an ability to adapt not only to fluctuating economic conditions, but also to changing cultural values and consumer demands. No discussion of the Rothschild family would be complete without mentioning their legendary wines. Estates such as Chateau Lafite, Rothschild, and Chateau Mouton, Rothschild, located in the Bordeaux region, have for generations commanded a prestige that extends beyond financial circles to the broader sphere of luxury connoisseurship. By employing modern vineyard technology and global branding strategies, these wine labels continue to garner top accolades from critics and collectors alike. They also illustrate the family's knack for weaving traditional prestige into the fabric of a contemporary, highly competitive market, thus preserving a cultural dimension that links them to heritage and authenticity, while simultaneously appealing to new, affluent consumers worldwide. Another pillar of their enduring legacy is philanthropy. The Rothschilds regard charitable involvement as both a social responsibility and a cornerstone of their identity. In Israel, Yad Hanadev stands as a major beneficiary of this tradition, underwriting projects that range from the preservation of archaeological sites to the sponsorship of advanced scientific research. The Supreme Court building in Jerusalem, funded by a Rothschild endowment, features prominently in discussions of architectural philanthropy and is a testament to how the family supports high-profile public works without overshadowing them with conspicuous self-promotion. Across Europe and North America, Rothschild-funded scholarships, museum expansions, and healthcare donations continue the family's legacy of benevolent engagement, an ethic that traces directly back to Mayor Amschel's insistence on leveraging wealth to serve broader communities, as well as to secure a place of respect in society. Central to all these endeavors is a meticulously orchestrated network of private partnerships and trusts that defies easy analysis by financial reporters or historical researchers. The Rothschild Archive in London offers a glimpse into how assets were initially spread across multiple countries to guard against political upheaval, and that geographical dispersion later evolved into an elaborate series of shell companies, shareholder agreements, and cross-border legal structures. The result is an economic footprint that remains a challenge to quantify, giving rise to persistent myths that the family controls wealth in the trillions. Scholars like Niall Ferguson, however, argue that while the Rothschilds certainly remain prosperous, their true genius lies in preserving a consistent, cohesive brand, one that confers influence in finance, philanthropy, and culture, rather than amassing some unimaginably vast centralized fortune. Their genuine achievement, in other words, is not a single towering mountain of wealth, but rather an interlinked tapestry of diversified assets and philanthropic commitments. That cohesive identity helps explain how they have navigated so many different eras without fracturing. Whether dealing with the fallout of revolutions in 19th century France or the global financial meltdowns of the 21st century, the Rothschilds have historically been able to close ranks when necessary, presenting a unified presence that conceals behind-the-scenes negotiations. The family has consistently practiced measured self-promotion, allowing them to remain relevant without falling prey to the pitfalls of celebrity culture. Even the famed name Rothschild, itself often attached to new ventures and philanthropic projects, does not overshadow the discreet manner in which decisions are made. While secrecy remains an integral part of their survival strategy, the Rothschilds are often admired for the adaptability that keeps them firmly connected to modernity. Their embrace of technology and forward-thinking environmental investments illustrates a willingness to respond to changing times, much as they once financed governments and infrastructural expansions that shaped the destiny of entire nations. Their philanthropic projects, much like their investments, combine forward-looking vision with a sober acknowledgement of social responsibilities. Ultimately, the longevity of the Rothschild family rests on a carefully maintained balance of legacy and innovation, profit and discretion. Their foundations date back to an era when wars and monarchies dictated market conditions, yet they have perpetually repositioned themselves to thrive in a world of multilateral corporations, technological disruptions, and instantaneous media exposure. By pursuing bold frontier opportunities while clinging to a deeply ingrained ethos of restraint and prudent diversification, they have sustained not just a line of impressive financial accomplishments, but a form of quiet prestige that still commands respect in business, philanthropy, and cultural spheres.